Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Nightwell Stories, where ordinary places can hide deeply unsettling secrets. I know many of you listen to these episodes as you're falling asleep, so before tonight's story begins, head down to the comments and tell us which city, state, or country you're listening from. If you enjoy dark mysteries and chilling true stories, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. All right, turn down the lights, get comfortable, and pay close attention because tonight's story begins somewhere no one expected in this new story. Across Appalachia, roadside diners often keep pieces of history that no museum would notice. Old photographs hang beside the register, handwritten recipes remain taped above the stove, and jukeboxes continue playing songs recorded before many customers were born. But in October 2022, the owner of a diner in Western Virginia repaired a jukebox that had been silent for more than 50 years. The first song named a local man who disappeared before sunrise. The final selection was introduced by the owner's daughter, although she was alive across town and had never recorded her voice. Caleb Dawson owned the Pine Hollow Diner beside an old highway near the Kentucky border. His parents had opened the business in 1978 after purchasing equipment from a dance hall destroyed during a mountain storm. The chrome jukebox near the front windows had never worked during Caleb's lifetime, but his father refused to remove it. He claimed the machine had already played its final song and should never be given enough power to begin another. Caleb dismissed the warning as superstition until his wife Anna vanished from the diner in 2001. Anna had been cleaning after closing when the jukebox produced music despite being unplugged. A truck driver passing outside saw her standing beside it shortly before midnight. By the time Caleb returned from the kitchen, Anna was gone. The doors were locked, her coat remained behind the counter, and no footprints crossed the fresh snow around the building. Police found only an old brass token inside the jukebox coin return. Anna Dawson and the date of her disappearance had been stamped into its surface. 21 years later, Caleb's daughter Emily helped him manage the diner while attending nursing school. During a heavy October storm, lightning struck a transformer near the highway and shut down power across Pine Hollow. At exactly 11:09 p.m., the jukebox lights turned on. Its selection buttons glowed beneath the dark ceiling, and a record began rotating behind the glass even though the machine remained disconnected from the wall. The music was an old Appalachian waltz performed by a band called the Laurel Mountain Five. Before the first verse, a male announcer calmly dedicated the song to Henry Cole and stated that his final dance would begin at 12:14 a.m. Henry was a retired mechanic who lived 3 miles away. Caleb called Sheriff Laura Pike, while Emily contacted Henry's family. They found his front door open and his bed empty. Security footage showed him leaving home in his pajamas at 12:14 and walking toward the mountain road. He was never seen reaching the diner. The next morning, Caleb opened the jukebox and found another brass token in the coin return. It carried Henry's name and the exact time he vanished. Inside the machine were dozens of similar tokens hidden beneath the record mechanism. Laura recognized several names from unresolved disappearances dating back to the 1970s. The oldest token belonged to Ruby Voss, age 19, who disappeared when the Laurel Mountain Dance Hall collapsed during a storm in 1969. County archives revealed that the Pine Hollow Diner had been built using timber, furniture, and electrical equipment salvaged from that dance hall. 26 people attended a Saturday night performance there on the 18th of October, 1969. Near midnight, a landslide destroyed the access road and damaged the building. Rescuers reached the site the following morning, but found the hall empty. Coats, cars, and half-finished drinks remained inside. Officials later claimed the guests had escaped through the forest, although none ever returned home. The only object removed before the hall was demolished was its jukebox. A deputy reported hearing music from inside the collapsed building 3 days after electricity had been disconnected. The record played the same unfinished waltz Caleb heard during the storm. Its final groove had been damaged, forcing the last 12 seconds to repeat continuously. The dance hall owner, Silas Voss, refused to allow workers to stop the machine because his daughter Ruby had disappeared while dancing beside it. Caleb searched his father's storage boxes and discovered a handwritten repair journal. His father had restored the jukebox in 1978, but disconnected it after learning what happened whenever the waltz reached its ending. The machine did not simply play music. It reopened the dance floor as it existed during the storm. Anyone whose name was announced before the song began would hear the music wherever they were and follow it toward the nearest door. When they crossed that doorway, one person trapped inside the hall was permitted to leave. The journal explained Anna's disappearance. In 2001, a damaged wire briefly powered the jukebox. Anna's name appeared on a token, and she was taken into the dance hall so one of the original guests could return. That same night, an elderly woman wearing clothing from the 1960s was found confused beside the highway. She identified herself as a Laurel Mountain patron and believed only a few minutes had passed since the storm. Caleb's father hid the connection because stopping the exchange required the record to reach its final note, which might release everyone inside or remove them permanently. At 11:09 the following night, the jukebox activated again. This time, no male announcer introduced the song. Emily's voice came through the speaker, quietly stating her own name and a final dance time of 12:14. Emily had never spoken those words, but the recording included the frightened breaths she made while listening. A fresh token dropped into the coin return before the music began. Laura moved Emily to the sheriff's office while Caleb removed the jukebox record. The music continued through the diner's ceiling speakers. When he broke the record in half, every radio in Pine Hollow began playing the waltz at the same point. Residents reported hearing Emily's voice from televisions, car stereos, telephones, and disconnected emergency sirens. The machine was no longer using its internal record. It was playing through every piece of electrical equipment salvaged or repaired with materials from the old dance hall. At the sheriff's office, Emily began walking toward a locked evidence room door as though listening to someone on the other side. Security cameras showed the hallway changing around her. Modern walls became rough timber, fluorescent lights turned into hanging bulbs, and shadowy couples appeared behind her in formal clothing. Laura restrained Emily, but her reflection continued walking until it passed through the locked door and disappeared. The real Emily immediately lost consciousness. Inside the diner, a doorway appeared behind the jukebox. Beyond it was the Laurel Mountain Dance Hall on the final night of 1969. Couples moved slowly across the floor beneath lights frozen in the middle of flickering. Some wore clothing from later decades. Caleb recognized Henry Cole, missing residents from the tokens, and Anna, unchanged since 2001. At the center stood Ruby Voss beside the damaged jukebox, holding one hand above the selection buttons. Anna explained that the trapped dancers could see years passing only when the jukebox activated. Each new name allowed one original guest to leave, but the person entering became part of the dance. Ruby had been selected as the final dancer in 1969, yet her father damaged the record before the last note could play. He believed he was saving his daughter, but he trapped the entire room inside the unfinished 12 seconds. Every later repair strengthened the mechanism and gave it access to new names. The dance hall ledger rested beside the bandstand. It listed every guest present in 1969, followed by the names of those collected afterward. Anna's entry had been crossed out and replaced by Emily Dawson. Caleb realized the machine had not chosen Emily at random. Anna had spent 21 years interfering with the selection process, preventing herself from being exchanged. The jukebox had chosen their daughter because she carried the same family connection and could complete the unfinished transfer. Ruby warned Caleb that removing Emily's name would force the machine to select another living relative. The only way to end the cycle was to let the record finish while the ledger contained the exact names of everyone physically inside the hall. If even one name was missing, that person would remain trapped as the new operator. Silas Voss had erased Ruby from the original list before damaging the record, hoping the hall would not recognize her as a guest. Instead, the machine had spent 53 years searching for someone to occupy her empty line. Caleb restored Ruby's name and removed Emily's. The dancers immediately stopped moving. Outside, Laura reported that Emily had awakened, but every door in the sheriff's office was beginning to open by itself. The waltz entered its final 12 seconds. Caleb counted the people inside and discovered one more body than names in the ledger. Near the bandstand stood his father, who had supposedly died from a stroke in 2008. Caleb's father admitted that he had not died naturally. After repairing the jukebox in 1978, he learned the person controlling the final record had to remain unlisted so everyone else could leave. He entered the dance hall years later and created a false death record outside. He had delayed the ending ever since, hoping Caleb would never reopen the machine. Now that Emily had been selected, there was no longer enough time to continue. Caleb wrote his father's name into the ledger. The final note began, but the page immediately created another empty line. The hall required someone to operate the jukebox until the music ended. Caleb placed his own name there and pressed the last selection button. His father tried to stop him, but the floor separated them as the building shook beneath the sound of the mountain collapsing outside. The final note played at exactly 12:14. Every light went dark. Anna, Ruby, Henry, Caleb's father, and the missing dancers appeared along the modern highway near the diner. None had aged beyond the night each disappeared. Emily was found safely inside the sheriff's office. The doorway behind the jukebox vanished, and the damaged machine collapsed into rusted metal and broken glass. Caleb did not return. County records changed before sunrise. The guests of Laurel Mountain Dance Hall were now listed as having survived the storm. Anna's missing person report disappeared, and Caleb's father was recorded as dying peacefully in 2022. Caleb's name vanished from the diner deed, family photographs, and business licenses. Anna and Emily remembered him, but most people in Pine Hollow believed Anna had operated the diner alone for decades. One object remained unchanged. Inside the jukebox coin return was a brass token carrying Caleb Dawson's name. No disappearance time was stamped beneath it. Instead, the metal read, "Song not yet finished." Every October, the diner's electricity fails at 11:09 p.m. For 12 seconds, customers hear Caleb's voice through the silent jukebox, reading a list of names that changes each year. Diner owners throughout the Appalachian counties now follow an unofficial rule whenever an old jukebox begins playing without electricity. They never listen for the dedication and never remove a token carrying a living person's name. If the record stops before its final note, they leave the building and do not attempt repairs. Because some songs are not waiting for someone to dance. They are waiting for someone to remain behind and keep the music from ending. In this new story, wildlife collars are designed to transmit location, speed, body temperature, and movement. They do not record voices, receive radio calls, or communicate with anyone beyond the satellites tracking them. But in November 2022, a biologist at Yellowstone National Park began receiving human speech from a collar attached to a gray wolf. The voice belonged to his wife, a backcountry ranger who had disappeared inside the park 9 years earlier. She warned him not to follow the wolf into a valley missing from every official map. Aaron Cole had studied Yellowstone's wolf population for nearly 17 years. He monitored den sites, examined kills, and spent long winters following packs through places most visitors never saw. His wife, Mara, had worked as a wilderness ranger in the northeastern section of the park. She vanished in December 2013 while investigating tracks near a closed drainage called Hollow Creek. Search teams found her snowmobile, radio, and one glove beside a frozen stream. Her footprints continued into the trees but never returned. No body was recovered. The strange signal began after Aaron's team captured an adult male wolf near Lamar Valley. The animal was unusually large, with pale fur and a healed scar running across its chest. Its teeth suggested an age of 6 or 7 years, yet an old metal tag inside its ear identified it as Wolf 14, first captured by park employees in 1995. That animal should have been dead for more than 20 years. The tag number, placement, and damage matched photographs in the original wolf restoration records. Aaron assumed someone had reused the tag illegally. He fitted the wolf with a modern satellite collar labeled YNP-821 and released it before sunset. For 2 days, the animal traveled normally with a small pack along the northern range. On the third evening, its GPS location suddenly jumped 18 miles south into terrain surrounded by steep mountains. The coordinates appeared inside a blank section of the park database where no valley, trail, or drainage was recorded. At 1:14 the following morning, Aaron's receiver activated without being connected to the tracking software. Beneath heavy static, he heard a woman breathing. Then, Mara's voice calmly said that Wolf 14 had crossed the old boundary and that Aaron must not let the pack reach the burned ranger station. The transmission lasted 17 seconds. Caller YNP-821 was not equipped with a microphone or speaker, and Mara had never recorded any message for the wildlife program. Park investigator Laura Pike joined Aaron in the tracking office while technicians inspected the signal. The voice matched Mara's radio recordings from 2013. Background analysis revealed wind, moving water, and dozens of wolves howling at different distances. Beneath those sounds was an old Park Service weather broadcast announcing the date as the 11th of December 2013, the night Mara vanished. The caller transmitted again shortly before dawn. Mara said the valley contained animals removed from Yellowstone's history and warned that the tracking system was opening the route wider each time Aaron requested another location. Seconds later, the computer displayed 43 new callers moving beside Wolf 14. Most numbers belonged to animals reported dead decades earlier. Several came from wolves killed before the species was reintroduced to Yellowstone. One identifier belonged to a mountain lion collared in 1978 and never found again. Aaron searched restricted archives for Hollow Creek. Early park maps showed a narrow valley east of Mount Washburn, but the name disappeared after a wildfire in 1931. A report written by Ranger Elias Ward described hundreds of animals entering the drainage during severe winters and failing to emerge in spring. Ward believed the valley had become a refuge for predators hunted under early park policies. Officials later burned the ranger station, destroyed the access trail, and removed Hollow Creek from maps to discourage further investigation. Mara's final patrol report contained one sentence Aaron had never been shown. She had found wolf tracks belonging to animals eliminated during government predator control campaigns nearly a century earlier. The prints crossed fresh snow without sinking into it. She followed them after hearing an emergency whistle from the abandoned Hollow Creek station. The last entry stated that the valley did not preserve animals after death. It preserved the moment the park stopped officially counting them. At noon, Wolf 14's collar appeared less than 5 miles from the burned station. Aaron requested authorization to enter the closed drainage with Laura and 2 wildlife officers. Their snowmobiles followed coordinates that repeatedly shifted between modern trails and roads removed before the Second World War. Near the tree line, they found an old wooden boundary post carrying a faded National Park Service emblem. One side read, Yellowstone National Park. The opposite side read, Unrecorded range, no animals beyond this point. Beyond the post, the forest became unnaturally quiet. Snow covered the ground, but thousands of animal tracks crossed it without disturbing one another. Bison prints overlapped wolf, elk, bear, and cougar tracks from different seasons. Some ended beside trees, others began in open ground. Aaron's receiver showed every missing caller surrounding the team, although no animals were visible. The valley appeared after they crossed a frozen stream. It was wider than the space between the surrounding mountains could physically contain. Herds of elk moved through open meadows beside wolves, wearing tags from different decades. Grizzly bears crossed among them without attacking. Near the valley's center stood an intact ranger station that records claimed had burned in 1931. Smoke rose from its chimney, and electric lights glowed inside despite no power lines reaching the area. Mara stood on the porch wearing the same winter uniform from the night she disappeared. She had not aged. To her, only several weeks had passed. She explained that every animal erased from an official count, hidden after an illegal killing, or listed dead without a recovered body eventually appeared in Hollow Creek. The valley had grown larger each time the park removed a species, closed an investigation, or changed a population number to avoid public attention. The animals could leave only when someone outside acknowledged that they still existed. Mara had entered while following Wolf 14 and discovered the ranger station's old population ledger. She tried adding the missing animals back into the count, but each restored entry required a living observer to remain in the valley and confirm it. Mara stayed so the wolves would not spread across Yellowstone and draw more visitors into Hollow Creek. Aaron found the ledger inside the station. Thousands of entries covered its pages, some named individual animals. Others recorded missing hikers, researchers, and rangers who had entered the valley while following impossible tracks. Mara's name appeared beside Wolf 14. Aaron's name had already been written on the next line, followed by the time of sunset that evening. Outside, the hidden herds began moving toward the frozen stream. Wolf 14 stood at the front, its caller transmitting every voice recorded in the valley. Missing rangers called for help. Hunters confessed to concealed kills. Park officials read population reports that had never been released. Mara warned that the valley was losing its boundary because Aaron's satellite system had given every unrecorded animal a modern location. If the pack crossed before sunset, Hollow Creek would appear on public maps and begin drawing visitors toward it. Aaron could not erase the coordinates without also erasing Mara and the animals again. Instead, he connected his field terminal to the park's wildlife database and created a new permanent management zone called Hollow Creek Preserve. He uploaded Wolf 14's current location, reopened every unresolved caller number, and classified the valley's population as living but restricted. Laura transmitted the same information through emergency channels, so the record existed beyond a single computer. The system rejected the update because the reported number of animals exceeded Yellowstone's estimated population. Aaron removed the estimates and entered the exact count displayed in the ranger ledger. Each accepted entry caused one animal in the meadow to become solid against the snow. Their tracks deepened, their breath appeared in the cold air, and callers that had been silent for decades began transmitting normally. When Aaron entered Mara as the active ranger assigned to Hollow Creek, the system demanded another employee to replace her before allowing reassignment. Aaron selected himself. Mara immediately began aging through the 9 years she had lost, while Aaron's identification card faded and reprinted with Hollow Creek Wildlife Observer beneath his name. Mara refused to leave him behind. She tore her original page from the ledger and placed Wolf 14's metal ear tag over both of their names. The station lights failed. Across the valley, thousands of callers transmitted one final signal at the same time. The sound was so powerful that every receiver in Yellowstone activated, broadcasting howls, footsteps, and voices from a century of missing reports. The animals turned away from the boundary and moved deeper into Hollow Creek. Wolf 14 remained beside Aaron and Mara until the last herd disappeared among the trees. Then the old wolf crossed the frozen stream alone. Its body faded with each step, leaving only caller YNP 821 on the snow. The metal ear tag vanished from Mara's hand, and the population ledger closed by itself. Aaron, Mara, Laura, and the wildlife officers reached the modern trail shortly after sunset. Only 42 minutes had passed outside, although Aaron believed they had spent most of the day inside the valley. Mara's identity was confirmed, and she had physically aged 9 years during the final moments at the station. Hollow Creek now appeared on internal park maps as a restricted wildlife research zone, but satellite photographs showed nothing except dense forest. The recovered collar contained no audio files. Its movement record ended in 1995, restarted in 2022, and then displayed one final location outside Yellowstone's legal boundary. That coordinate was inside another national park hundreds of miles away. Attached to the final transmission was a list of animals reported missing from government tracking programs across the United States. Wildlife researchers in national parks now follow an unofficial rule whenever a collar belonging to a dead animal begins moving again. They never request repeated locations and never follow the signal beyond an unmarked boundary post. If human voices appear in the transmission, the animal is removed from the active tracking map without being marked dead. Because some wilderness areas do not hide animals that have disappeared, they collect every living thing that official records decided was no longer there. In this news story, air traffic controllers are trained to recognize every aircraft entering their assigned airspace. Radar displays flight numbers, altitude, speed, and direction, while computers compare each signal with approved flight plans. An unidentified aircraft can trigger military alerts within minutes. But during a violent thunderstorm in May 2017, a controller at a regional airport in Kansas detected a passenger jet approaching from the west without modern navigation equipment. The flight number belonged to an aircraft that had vanished nearly 40 years earlier. More disturbing still, its passenger manifest contained the names of people scheduled to fly from the same airport the following morning. Daniel Harper had worked the overnight shift at Midvale Regional Airport for 14 years. The airport was small, handling mostly cargo flights and short passenger routes connecting rural Kansas with larger cities. Nighttime traffic was usually quiet enough that Daniel could track every aircraft without assistance. He trusted radar more than his own eyes because storms, fatigue, and darkness could create illusions. Machines, he believed, did not imagine airplanes. Shortly after 2 a.m. on May 11, a severe storm crossed the western edge of the county. Lightning repeatedly illuminated the empty runways, and wind shook the control tower windows. Most incoming flights had already been diverted. Only one cargo aircraft remained in the area when Daniel noticed a second radar return appearing 28 miles west of the airport. The unknown aircraft traveled at less than 6,000 feet, dangerously low for the surrounding terrain. Its transponder transmitted an outdated 4-digit code no longer accepted by modern systems. Daniel attempted to identify the flight, but the computer displayed only a single line of information: Prairie Air Flight 217. Daniel recognized the name immediately. Prairie Air had been a small regional airline that ceased operating in the early 1980s. Flight 217 had disappeared on the 6th of October 1978 while traveling from Denver to Midvale with 51 passengers and 4 crew members. The pilot reported electrical problems during heavy weather before all communication ended. Search teams covered thousands of square miles, but no wreckage was ever located. Assuming someone had entered the historical flight number as a joke, Daniel called the aircraft on the emergency frequency. Static filled his headset for several seconds before a weak male voice responded. The pilot identified himself as Captain Robert Hale of Prairie Air Flight 217 and requested permission to land at Midvale. He reported severe turbulence, damaged instruments, and limited fuel. The voice sounded calm but strangely distant, as though transmitted through miles of water. Daniel asked the pilot to confirm the date. Captain Hale answered the 6th of October 1978, Before Daniel could respond, the transmission faded beneath the sound of passengers screaming somewhere behind the cockpit. Daniel alerted airport security and contacted his supervisor, Karen Mitchell, who lived 10 minutes away. While waiting for her arrival, he watched the radar signal continue toward the airport. The aircraft's speed remained constant despite powerful winds pushing every modern plane off course. Weather radar showed the storm dividing around Flight 217, leaving a narrow corridor of clear air directly ahead of it. At 2:19, the airport's abandoned eastern runway lights switched on by themselves. That runway had been closed for repairs and disconnected from the control system. Yet, hundreds of blue and white lights appeared beneath the rain, forming a glowing path through the darkness. Daniel attempted to shut them off, but his console showed no electricity flowing toward the runway. Karen arrived with 2 security officers and listened to the next transmission. Captain Hale stated that he could see Midvale's terminal and requested final landing clearance. Daniel looked through binoculars but saw only rain. Radar placed the aircraft less than 4 miles from the runway. No engine noise reached the tower. No landing lights appeared in the clouds. Then, lightning flashed across the sky. For less than a second, everyone in the tower saw an old twin-engine passenger plane flying beneath the storm. Its silver body carried the faded Prairie Air logo. The aircraft appeared badly damaged, with part of its tail missing and black marks surrounding several windows. It vanished back into darkness before anyone could take a photograph. Karen ordered Daniel not to authorize the landing. The eastern runway contained construction equipment and deep trenches that would destroy any aircraft touching down. Daniel instructed Flight 217 to divert north, but Captain Hale insisted the runway looked clear. According to the pilot, airport employees were already waiting beside the terminal to guide passengers inside. Security cameras showed the eastern terminal completely empty. It had not been used since a renovation in 1996. Yet one camera suddenly displayed dozens of figures standing behind its dark windows. They wore clothing from several different decades, some carried old suitcases, while others held modern backpacks and rolling luggage. Every person faced the runway. The airport printer began operating without receiving a command. Page after page emerged from the machine, each carrying the old Prairie Air logo. The first document was a passenger manifest for Flight 217, dated the 6th of October, 1978. It listed the 51 people who had disappeared. The second manifest carried the same flight number, but a departure date of the 12th of May, 2017, the following morning. The newer document contained 51 names. Every one belonged to a passenger booked on different flights, leaving Midvale after sunrise. Some were traveling to Chicago. Others were flying to Dallas, Denver, or Atlanta. None had purchased a ticket with Prairie Air. At the bottom of the list were 4 crew members scheduled to work separate airlines. Daniel searched for his own name and did not find it. Karen's name was also absent. But one security officer, Michael Torres, appeared as passenger number 37 despite having no travel plans. The arrival column beside his name listed the 6th of October, 1978. Michael's radio suddenly activated. A woman's voice calmly asked him to come to the eastern terminal. Michael turned pale and admitted that the voice belonged to his mother, who had been a passenger aboard Flight 217 when he was only 3 years old. He had spent most of his life believing she died somewhere in the mountains. Now her voice was telling him that the flight had finally arrived and she had saved him a seat. Before anyone could stop him, Michael ran from the tower. Security cameras tracked him crossing the service road toward the abandoned terminal. The figures behind the windows moved closer to the glass as he approached. One woman raised her hand. Michael stopped outside the locked entrance and placed his palm against the door directly opposite hers. Every light in the airport went out. Emergency generators failed at the same moment. For several seconds, the only illumination came from the eastern runway, where the impossible landing lights burned through the rain. Then, the sound of aircraft engines filled the tower. It grew rapidly louder, shaking windows and rattling equipment. Flight 217 appeared at the edge of the runway. Its landing gear touched the pavement without striking any construction equipment. The plane passed directly through excavators, barriers, and piles of concrete as though they were only shadows. Water sprayed behind its wheels, but no marks appeared on the runway. The aircraft slowed beside the eastern terminal and stopped. Its engines continued turning without producing smoke or heat. A set of stairs unfolded from the forward door. The passengers standing behind the terminal windows disappeared. Seconds later, the terminal doors opened, and Michael walked alone toward the plane. Daniel contacted him over the radio, but Michael never answered. He climbed the stairs and entered the aircraft. As soon as the door closed, the newer passenger manifest changed. Michael's name vanished from position 37 and appeared on the 1,978 list beside his mother's name. His age was recorded as 3 years old. The aircraft remained motionless while the control tower received another transmission. Captain Hale stated that Flight 217 could not depart until all reserved passengers had boarded. Daniel looked at the manifest dated tomorrow. Names began disappearing from the document one at a time. Each time a name vanished, an alarm sounded somewhere inside the airport. Karen called the airlines to warn them not to allow anyone on the list into the terminal. Airport officials began contacting passengers at their homes. Several never answered. Police sent to their addresses found front doors open, beds empty, and suitcases packed near the entrances. Security footage from surrounding roads showed some of the missing passengers walking toward the airport through the storm, even those who lived dozens of miles away. One camera showed an elderly man approaching on foot while carrying a suitcase. He had left a nursing facility nearly 40 miles away less than an hour earlier. Another showed a woman in pajamas crossing a flooded field with her eyes closed. None reacted to rain, traffic, or officers calling after them. They all moved toward the eastern terminal at the same slow pace. Daniel realized the runway lights were guiding more than the aircraft. He left the tower and drove toward the electrical station, controlling the airport's lighting network. Although the eastern runway was supposedly disconnected, he found one live cable running beneath the control box. The cable was wrapped in faded cloth insulation and marked with a manufacturing date from 1978. He cut it with an emergency tool. The runway lights remained on. Instead, every light across the rest of the airport went dark, leaving only the path toward Flight 217 visible. The plane's cabin windows glowed with pale yellow light. Behind each window sat a passenger staring straight ahead. Several seats remained empty. Karen searched archived airport plans and discovered that the eastern terminal had originally been built specifically for Prairie Air. On the night Flight 217 vanished, witnesses reported seeing an aircraft land there during the same storm. Officials dismissed the reports because radar showed the plane hundreds of miles away. A baggage employee later claimed that passengers had entered the terminal from the runway but disappeared before reaching the main building. He resigned the following morning and was never seen again. Daniel entered the abandoned terminal through a maintenance door. Inside, the building no longer looked empty. Bright signs advertised flights from 1978. Cigarette smoke hung beneath the ceiling. Old televisions displayed weather reports about the missing Prairie Air aircraft. People filled the waiting area, but none moved or spoke. Their faces matched photographs of passengers who had disappeared from Midvale during the 4 decades after Flight 217 vanished. At Gate 6, a young employee stood behind the counter wearing a Prairie Air uniform. She handed Daniel a boarding pass printed with his name. The destination was not Denver or Midvale. It listed a date instead of a city, the 11th of May, 2017. Beneath it appeared a seat number that did not exist on the aircraft, Seat 0. Daniel tore the ticket apart. Every person in the terminal turned toward him. The departure board began changing rapidly, replacing city names with years. 1978 became 1986, then 1996, 2017, and finally a series of future dates. Each date was followed by a flight number connected to an aircraft accident that had not yet occurred. A boarding announcement instructed the final passengers to proceed immediately. Doors opened along the terminal walls. Through each doorway, Daniel saw a different airport during a different decade. Some appeared modern, others had not yet been constructed. People walked through them carrying luggage, unaware they were entering Midvale's abandoned terminal. Daniel found Michael standing near the gate leading to Flight 217. Beside him was the woman from the old passenger photograph. Michael now appeared 3 years old, holding his mother's hand. Neither recognized Daniel. As they entered the plane, the terminal employees stamped their boarding passes and marked them as returned. Daniel reached the gate controls and activated the emergency fire alarm. Water poured from ceiling sprinklers, but it did not fall normally. The droplets stopped in the air and began moving upward. The people inside the terminal slowly faded, followed by the counters, signs, and furniture from 1978. For several seconds, Daniel stood inside the empty modern building again. Outside, Flight 217 started moving toward the runway. Daniel ran onto the pavement as Karen called through his radio. She had found the original emergency report filed by the missing baggage employee. According to his statement, the aircraft could not leave unless the control tower cleared it for departure. Without authorization, it would remain trapped between landing and takeoff. Captain Hale repeatedly requested clearance. Daniel climbed into an emergency vehicle and parked it across the runway. Flight 217 continued accelerating directly toward him. Its landing lights grew brighter, filling the windshield with white light. At the final moment, Daniel transmitted a command denying takeoff and permanently closing the runway. The aircraft passed through the emergency vehicle without impact. For one instant, Daniel found himself inside its cabin. Every seat was occupied by passengers from different time periods. Some appeared asleep. Others stared through the windows at storms raging outside airports around the world. Michael sat beside his mother near the rear, still appearing as a child. At the front of the plane, Captain Hale turned away from the controls. His face was burned on one side, and rainwater poured continuously from his uniform. He pointed toward an empty seat marked with the number 0. On it rested a control tower headset identical to Daniel's. Then the aircraft vanished. Daniel's emergency vehicle sat alone on the dark runway. The storm had ended. Radar no longer showed Flight 217, and the eastern runway lights had finally turned off. Only 9 minutes had passed since the first signal appeared. Michael Torres was never found. Police recovered his radio beside the locked terminal entrance, but security footage showed him disappearing the moment his hand touched the glass. All 51 passengers listed on the future manifest were found safely at home. None remembered leaving their houses, although several woke with wet shoes and old Prairie airboarding passes inside their pockets. Airport officials demolished the eastern terminal the following year. Workers discovered 55 suitcases sealed beneath the concrete floor. 51 belonged to the original passengers and 4 to the crew of Flight 217. Inside Michael's mother's suitcase was a recent photograph of her standing beside an adult Michael in the terminal. On the back, someone had written that they had finally completed the journey together. Daniel retired from air traffic control soon afterward. He continued receiving anonymous flight notifications on his phone every May 11. Each message listed Prairie Air Flight 217 as delayed, never canceled. The number of remaining passengers changed every year. In 2024, the notification showed only 1 seat available. The passenger name was Daniel Harper, and the boarding time was 2:19 a.m. Beneath it was a warning that Flight 217 would make one final approach before the eastern runway closed forever. That night, Daniel disappeared from his home. His doors remained locked, and his car stayed in the garage. At Midvale Regional Airport, controllers briefly detected an unidentified aircraft approaching through clear skies. It carried an obsolete transponder code and requested permission to land on a runway that no longer existed. The controller refused clearance, but the aircraft continued descending. For 1 second, security cameras showed a silver passenger plane moving across an empty field where the eastern runway once stood. In the cockpit beside Captain Hale sat Daniel Harper, wearing a control tower headset and looking directly toward the camera. Since then, Flight 217 has appeared on radar during severe storms at airports across the American Midwest. It never lands in the same place twice. Its passenger list is always dated one day in the future, and one seat is always left empty. Controllers who hear the pilot's voice are told never to clear the aircraft for arrival. Because Flight 217 is not searching for an airport, it is searching for the final person needed to complete a flight that has been approaching its destination since 1978.